Hello again and welcome to Backyard Farmer. I'm Kim Todd. We're so glad you could join us for another hour of answering those gardening questions. Tonight's program was taped earlier in the week, so unfortunately we will not be taking your calls tonight, but you can still send us an email or a picture for a future show. That address is byf@unl.edu. Give us as much information about your question as you can, or I will send you a follow-up question, and make sure you tell us where you live. Don't forget to follow Backyard Farmer during the week, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Pinterest. So, Jim, you have something called the Drifters.
Yeah, I'm really excited about showing this. Yeah,
it's a song.
These are some of the Drifters, and this is a magic moment for sure, being able to show some beautiful butterflies. And I just wanted the camera maybe to kind of frame the whole box.
Look.
And if you want to, you could probably take a shot of that with your cell phone. So then you can remember the details later. Okay, so this is just a representation of some of the drifters of butterflies that come into our area that don't really belong here. And they, in fact, generally they don't even have we don't have host plants here that would accommodate them. And so here's a representation of some of them. The one, let's start from the teeny tiniest one is called Western Pygmy Blue.
Okay.
It feeds in the desert regions of the United States of America, and it has a distinction of being the smallest butterfly in the United States. All right, isn't that cool? Now the one that's in the middle, front middle or top middle, is the queen, and I think a lot of us are familiar with those, and they actually do drift in from the south. Most of these drift in from the south in the summertime, and one reason is because of the currents. You know, the weather generally flows from the south and southwest into Nebraska through the season. So we know that feeds on milkweeds. It looks a lot like a monarch butterfly. Okay, the one that's on the right-hand upper side is the Gulf fritillary, hint, hint, comes from the Gulf regions of the United States, and it feeds on passion vines, which we don't seem to have in Nebraska. So when they come in this area, it's like a dead end, you know. So then we go to the bottom of the fritillary, and we have the zebra swallowtail, and we all get excited when we see these, and sometimes on campus, and they feed on pawpaws, and we actually have a pawpaw in the arboretum. So if there are a few that come in, they could possibly survive. And then in the middle there, we have a rather drab-looking, looks like a drab swallowtail of some sort, but why would anybody want to be enthralled with that one? Well, yeah, because it's drab. But if you turn it around, it's interesting. Okay, it's a female. Most females aren't very showy in the natural world. The males usually are. But look at that. Okay, let me turn it this way. And this way, I got to think backwards.
Yeah,
it's like backing up a trailer.
Isn't it pretty? On the underside, all right? And then the last one, of course, is the one that's called the bordered patch. And that feeds on sunflowers. It looks a lot like our checker spots and other kinds of butterflies that we see on our composites and sunflowers here, but it's a little bit different and different enough. So if you keep an eye out for these, kind of like bird watching, if you keep an eye out on these through the summer, you might just see them drift in. It would be, and if we just conserve them and everything like that, try to protect our beautiful butterflies, maybe we will have them forever to the end of time.
There we go. We're moving up.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I love it. Thanks, Jim. Okay, Matt, you do have syringes.
Yes, I got some syringes. I should have brought some dandelions to match the color over here, but I have a common lamb's quarter. And what I'm going to show is basically talking about the use of herbicides and using them correctly. So reading the label is always important, and generally when you're buying a herbicide, you don't want to just look at the rate. You want to make sure that you're checking all the other stuff on there, because there's good details on how to use them so they work better and when to use them. So one of the things I'm going to look at is, I brought 2 syringes here, and one of them has water in it, and one of them has a surfactant in it. So a surfactant is something that some herbicides require, not all of them, but by reading the label, you can find out if they do or not. And it's basically something that helps the herbicide stick to the plant and enter the plant so that it can translocate within. And if you're using just water without it and it requires it, a lot of the times you don't get as good a control, and you may wonder why. So it's always good to make sure you read the label. If they have those hints in there or better ways to use them, make sure that you're following correctly. So I was just going to show here, if we take the water on this leaf right here, and I squirt it on there, it's just going to bead off. So if you're spraying a herbicide that requires a surfactant or one that should have had it, you basically would have been applying a product and getting minimal control. With the surfactant, this next one that I have here is just a non-ionic surfactant, and if you put it on the leaf, it actually smears on the leaf. You can see it still running off, but it actually left like a trail along the leaf, and that is how that herbicide is active on the plant. So some of the products that we use in the lawn a lot might be Quinclorac. If you're using that product straight, that one says use a methylated seed oil. Tenacity says an NIS. Just make sure you check the labels. There's a lot of different ones that require different types of surfactants.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Matt. Okay, Lauren, a rot, a spot, or an accident?
Well, I don't have anything as magical as butterflies, but I've got a juniper with some tip blight that you might think is tip blight. A lot of times we see symptoms like I'm showing here where we get just individual shoots where we'll have little shoots dying off. One of the things with this, though, I went and looked closer at it, and you can kind of see it's right at a point where they did some pruning. What I suspect is maybe this was done right before maybe an early spring frost or something where we actually did some damage to this bud. If this was Cabotina tip blight, which would be common on junipers, we'd expect to see some little dusty sporulation right in here, but we don't see that. So this is just a good example of something that could look like a disease, but isn't. So no real management needed. You can just prune those out at this point and take care of it. And that's actually what a lot of times we recommend for Cabotina tip blight as well, just to remove that inoculum.
Excellent. So darn pruning, you have to do it at the right time.
It'll be the right time.
All right, Elizabeth, what is your sample?
Well, I also brought something magical, or at least I think so. It's something that's really fun. Now, oftentimes we see these large trees. They're the tulip tree, or the tulip tree poplar, and one of the reason it gets its name is because sometimes the leaves kind of look like a tulip. The thing that a lot of people don't get to see is this lovely yellow kind of fun flower, because they're held up higher into the tree. And so what happens is as this starts to age and as it starts to kind of go away, these guys kind of get a little woody, and then the tree still holds them up in there. So if you look up in the tree as the season progresses, you can see these little tiny, they look like fake little wooden flowers up in the trees. And there's something that's really fun. Now in the eastern part of the state, they grow fairly well, they grow fairly quickly. There are a few in the central part of the state, and if we have them in the central part of the state, we need to really protect them and put them in an area where they're not going to get a lot of the winter damage, where they're not going to be in areas where they're going to get hit with a lot of different winter issues. There are some growing in St. Paul that are really kind of fun to look at. They've only had one disease that I'm aware of, so it's something that's really kind of fun and something that we really don't get to see very often because it's up so high.
Yeah, and it's actually early for them to be blooming, so they're usually a little bit later, but quite pretty.
We have one that's immense in our neighbor's yard.
Yeah,
Immense.
there's a huge one on J Street here in Lincoln too, like that huge. Yeah. All right, picture questions. Jim, this is your first one, and it is a Northeast Lancaster County viewer, and she's noticed many of these. She sent us some pictures of the upside and the downside. She says they hover, buzz, and croak. And she has actually seen some of the mating practices, but then she saw a hole in the wood above the door, which I think our viewers can see there.
Yeah, I can see that too.
She's wondering what it is and what to do about it.
It's the eastern carpenter bee, and the ones that are dying are the males. In the springtime, the males and females get together, and then the males are expendable, and so they die. But the females go ahead and they will either continue or initiate a nest, and they chew into wood, which is frequently like steps, decking, fences, fence rails, and things like that. So over time, they can actually be detrimental. So it'd be important just to note where they may be and where they may be digging their long tunnels, because they can be really long, where they build cells and their brood is incubated or whatever, develops. So I would say probably where there's prone areas that are prone to be for subject to tunneling or whatever like that. See if you can do whatever you can. Sometimes it means just coating the wood surface so they don't have any kind of a means to dig in very effectively. They frequently will dig in with the grain. And so if there are any end portions of lumber or wood showing, you know, just paint that over that, and that will help diminish that. So, and then some kind of insecticidal dust if you absolutely have to. They are important pollinators, but if you absolutely have to save your deck or whatever over a period of time, then employ something like an insecticide so the residue can take care of that, unfortunately.
All right, thanks, Jim. Okay, so this is really fun, Matt. It's kind of between you and Lauren.
We get to fight for
But
it.
this viewer found us on YouTube from Sioux Falls.
Nice.
So our reach is far, and he said the real issue here is he has turf, and it's a cool season blend, and went from nice to dead within a week. Kind of like this, and he's wondering what in the world has happened with this. He's thinking maybe a leaf spot or...
Yeah, it's, I don't know, what I was looking at was possible, like a blight, Ascochyta blight. Is that?
Ascochyta can produce those white tips like that, Matt, so that could be. This time of year, the other one, I've just seen the picture now, dollar spot came to mind because it can kill the tip, but it wouldn't typically bleach. If it's rolled at all, it would be Ascochyta. So that may be one that they want to send a sample in and kind of watch as it progresses. And
Right.
if it's Ascochyta, usually drought associated.
Yeah,
or
so I don't know if it was
compaction.
dry first. Usually you'll see that in the summertime when people are mowing on their lawns and you'll get that bleaching afterwards, and that's generally to a drought. But
Good, so he potentially, now that he's found us, he can find us again.
Yeah.
and send
Yeah,
us
kind of
more
watch it
pics
if it
or-
rolls, maybe.
Yeah.
That would be Ascochyta. If it goes away when it has moisture and not dry spot associated, then you know it was probably Ascochyta too.
Because it
Okay.
generally affects the leaves only, and then the roots, usually it'll grow out of it. It won't kill the plant completely, which is
Okay.
nice. One nice disease, right?
Absolutely.
Nice disease.
Well, I think they're all
Yeah.
nice diseases, man. But that's-
All right, and since you love trees so much, Lauren, you have
Love
two tree
trees.
pictures.
I only got to cut a tree down on Backyard Farmer earlier this
And,
year.
and these are actually crab apples, not apple apples. But both of them, I think, you get them because one of these is actually out in Gering. This one is in Gering. And the other one is on the eastern part of the state, actually in Iowa, Trainer, Iowa. So we're 500 miles apart. Both of these were large pruning wounds, and then they're wondering, of course, I think you can even see the fungus on that one. Can these trees be saved?
Well, it's really a matter of time. So in some of these situations where you have such a long, like in this picture particularly, you got this large wound and this branch coming off the side, you know, the likelihood of that branch breaking off at some point is very high. So, you know, it's really just dependent on how much life they want out of this landscape and what they're looking for. But realistically, a couple of those pictures of tree probably could be removed. It might be the best move, and just reinvest in a new tree and take it as an opportunity to plant something different. A lot of our flowering crab apples get several different fungal cankers, and many times it's associated with a wound, and then that continues. So the best thing to do is try to, in general, remove any dead branches and limbs. The one picture had a quite stressed whole trunk area probably from that, and that one's probably going to just die. So I hate to say it, but probably would remove and
Both
go
of
ahead
them. Yeah.
and start over.
Yeah, there we go again with pruning.
Yeah.
All right,
Handsaws are fun tools.
Elizabeth, this is also two different viewers. The first from Scotts Bluff, the second from Holdridge with Sparegrass that is doing this. So what in the world is that?
That is something that is super fascinating because it's called fasciation. What happens is at some point in time there's either damage to the growing point or potentially herbicide issues, or let's say that it might have gotten scarred as it's trying to push through the ground. And so that growing point then spreads out. And so that's what's happening with that asparagus is it's turning into a fan shape and it's really compressed and it's still going to grow just fine. I asked the Scotts Bluff person if it tasted any different, and I have not gotten a response yet as to whether or not it tasted any different. It's just probably not going to be as fleshy. you know, because it's really flat, but it's still going to be edible. There's nothing wrong with the plant. It might do it again. It might not do it again. You know, if you were to cut the spear off, I can't guarantee that it's going to come up with the spear that's going to do the exact same thing, but it's just something really cool. Some plants are known to do it, and some plants are bred to do it. Like there's a pussy willow that's made to do it. It's supposed to be fanned like that, but most of the time when we see dandelions and things like that, not as cool as asparagus, but you know, we'll just take what we can get. It's something that's super fun.
All right, thanks, Elizabeth. Well, we've been focusing a lot on early season greens and vegetables, and one of the most popular garden plants for a lot of people is rhubarb. Everybody's grandma had some sort of a recipe for a rhubarb dessert, but before you can have that cobbler, you've got to know a few tips about growing it properly. Here's Nebraska Extension educator John Porter to give us some tips on growing rhubarb the right way.
Nothing reminds me of my childhood like rhubarb, and it makes me think of having dinner at my grandmother's house on a Sunday afternoon, and she would make a rhubarb cobbler that actually most of us wouldn't eat. I hated rhubarb as a child, but I absolutely love it now. And rhubarb is one of those old-fashioned plants that's sort of making a resurgence. You find it in all the farmers markets, you find it in garden centers, and people want to grow it all the time. But there are some tips and tricks that you need to know to have good rhubarb success. Some people, it's just automatic, and some people, they really struggle with growing rhubarb. So we're going to talk about a few things that can help when growing your rhubarb. So first, you'll notice we have all these rhubarb plants around us, and if you have this rhubarb planted, there's a little something wrong with this rhubarb that can actually really help your harvest, and that is you see it in bloom. So a lot of times the rhubarb wants to bloom, and that actually takes energy away from the plant that you're trying to grow. And so it actually makes it a little more spindly, and it reduces your harvest. So what you want to do is take a nice sharp knife, go in at the base of this stalk, and just cut it out and remove it. And that will really help your rhubarb health. And that's the number one tip. A lot of people don't realize that you have to do that. The number two tip whenever you're growing your rhubarb is to actually plant it at the correct depth. And a lot of people, I think, miss that point. So you buy your little rhubarb plant, or you get your little rhubarb plant from your neighbor who gave you a start, and you have this tiny little plant, and you go to plant it, and what a lot of people do is they plant it way too deep. And what you want to do is actually make sure that you plant it right here where the joint is, where the roots attach to the rest of the plant. And you want to make sure that that is not below ground level. And you even want to take into consideration if you're mulching. So what you want to make sure is if you're mulching, to sort of mound up the soil a little bit so that the mulch isn't even up around that, because that can be one of the things that causes rhubarb to fail to thrive. So you want to think about that. Now sometimes if you buy it at the store in early spring, they have it in those little bags with the other bulbs and the potatoes and the onions, and you basically just get a root, the crown. And so you have to be really careful with that, because that's just basically this little part right here. And so you have to make sure that this part stays above ground and the roots are below ground, even when you have that little crown that you don't even really know if it's going to grow into a plant sometimes. So after you've taken care of that and after you've planted it, you really want to manage the fertility. So rhubarb likes a lot of organic matter, so you can work organic matter into the soil. When you plant, you can also top dress with organic matter. That can help with the soil structure, and that can help with nutrients. You want to put in a good balanced fertilizer. Apparently, according to your soil test, is what we always tell you, is to check the fertility. You want just good balance. And rhubarb is actually a vegetable, so it's something that we grow in the vegetable garden, but you don't have to grow it right in the raised bed or the vegetable garden. You can put it anywhere in the landscape, along with some of those other perennial vegetables like asparagus. So find a good place for it to live, and it will actually live many years happy and healthy in your garden.
There are plenty of delicious desserts just waiting for you to get into that rhubarb or the rhubarb into those. So hopefully that will help you get a nice crop year after year. And we did have a discussion off air about, you know, the people who have spouses that don't like it means those who do have to go out to eat, Lauren.
Yes. Know that pretty well.
All right, so picture 2, Jim, this is just kind of a curious moth sent in from a Blair family. Said the rear end was sort of curled up like a scorpion.
Okay, yeah. Very simply, that's a sphinx moth, and it's called Abbott's sphinx because some guy named Abbott probably saw it for the first time. And what that one is doing is a male, no wait a minute, it's a female, because the reason why it is pointed like a scorpion is she's releasing pheromone to attract males. And so that was her site that she chose. And so as larvae, they are the horntail kind of caterpillars, and they feed on grape and Virginia creeper and other related plants, along with Pandora's sphinx and Akamon sphinx. So there's a number of them that like to feed on grape.
Which is probably not very good for the grape growers.
No.
All right.
Bad news.
Bad news. Okay, Matt, this is a Sydney viewer. Has a grass growing in his lawn actively and wants to know how he can control it short of killing the entire lawn and reseeding it. So he sent us some great pictures, actually.
He did. He sent some really good pictures. That first one, you can actually zoom in and look at the plant, because just by looking at a picture that was maybe a little blurry, it looks kind of like tall fescue to me. But looking closer, there was some signs that pointed away from tall fescue. It has a membranous ligule that tall fescue doesn't have. So the closest thing that I came to would be colonial bentgrass or some type of Agrosis species, red top. So that one, and it looks like you have a bluegrass lawn, so the possibility for treating that would be tenacity or mesotrione. That's pretty much a good control for creeping bentgrass or many types out of cool season turf. So that would be one way to get it out without injuring the bluegrass. You might see some bleaching, but that's just the herbicide working.
All right. So again, the great pictures, especially of grasses, as we talked last week, to get down there and
makes it a little easier.
The
to tell.
ligule is what part?
It's the part that connects to the sheath. Or it's right at the bottom of the leaf, and it actually almost looks like a cuff around the leaf itself.
Yeah, cuff or collar. Perfect. Thanks, Matt. Okay, Lauren, this is kind of a simple question with probably not a simple answer. What's wrong with the peach?
Yeah, so when I first saw it was going to be a peach question in the picture, I thought, oh, we're going to have to find a peach leaf curl, which it was a great spring for. But this one, I don't really think that's it. These bleach spots, and I looked at it quite a bit and looked for different answers, and I really don't know on this one. I think I would recommend they just watch it and see how it progresses. If they do see any curling of the leaves of other leaves that develop, it's possible to find it, but I really don't think it is, and it doesn't match any common peach diseases. So just kind of watch that one and see how it progresses, and if it continues or causes more trouble, then I'd submit a sample so we can take a look at it.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. Elizabeth, now we have a knockout rose question that have been knocked out. This is, she's got some that are mulched with rocks, some are mulched with regular wood chips. The regularly mulched plants look better than the rock mulched ones. She's wondering, is there anything worth saving? Should she prune off the dead branches? She does know the rock does make a more harsh environment. So what do we want to say here?
That one that's up on the screen right now, I don't believe there's going to be much saving with that one. You could prune out the dead, you can see what happens, but my guess is it's not going to overwinter very well come this winter. We did see a lot of death and dieback in a lot of the roses this year, and that's a good reminder of why we wait to prune our roses until we see where that dead and alive is at. And also it helps to prevent what Lauren talked about with that juniper, is we don't get dieback into those canes after we make the pruning wound and if we get the cold temperatures. But yes, that wood mulch makes for a little bit better environment, especially around roses, because it's not reflecting the heat, it's not reflecting the light back onto those, and we're not going to see quite as many diseases, right, Lauren, in some of those types of environments. So just kind of one of those where that wood mulch is really going to help to with that moisture as well. The rock's really not going to do a lot of good when it comes to conserving moisture.
All right, thanks, Elizabeth. Well, we are finally ready to plant out at our garden. So as we start to get our warm season vegetables and ornamentals hardened off, Terry James will get prepared by showing us a few structures for our tomatoes, beans, and our other tall plants. Let's take a few minutes to check out what's going on in the Backyard Farmer garden.
This week in the Backyard Farmer garden, we're getting all of our veggies in. We did a little bit of pre-planting this winter, and we wanted to make sure that we had all the supports that we possibly could to make sure that all of our plants are happy early when they're going in. So that's one thing you need to remember. Buy those little plants. Those little plants are going to get big eventually throughout the summer. So we have several different supports in our garden. We kind of have this kind of horseshoe-like thing that you can sit around a tomato. You're going to have to kind of help it through and kind of weave it in. We have just the basic 10 by 10 welded wire mesh. You can either make a big cylinder out of it. What we like to do is use a couple T-posts and kind of make like a serpentine and then weave our tomatoes through that. We have the regular basic tomato cage that everybody's used for years that you can buy at any garden store. We have some fun things like this A-frame. We do have to make sure that it gets staked down because it will blow over in the wind. And then we have a couple kind of cool ones. We have this one with string for some string beans to climb up, or some cantaloupe or some cucumbers that's gonna climb up that. So stop by the Backyard Farmer garden and check out and see all of our structures to hold our plants up this summer.
And if you grow tomatoes, especially those indeterminate varieties, which means 10 feet tall, you're going to want to get those structures in place as soon as the plant goes in the ground. And it helps if you're a little taller than Terry or perhaps the host to try to get those strings all the way up. All right, Jim, just a question for you. This is an Omaha area question. They have a community garden group. Doesn't allow any herbicides or pesticides. They're overrun with grubs and June bugs. What can...
Sounds reasonable because of that.
So what can they do to protect themselves and the
Well, what I
produce?
was wondering if that's truly the case. I mean, there are organic growers who are allowed to use certain kinds of pesticides or whatever for insect and other kind of disease, pest control. And so check into that first, because there are non-persistent and other means of controlling insects. And so, for example, neem oil can be used. Insecticidal soaps can be used for a lot of soft-bodied insects, for those pesky Japanese beetles. You know, continuous doses of just pyrethrins. You know, it's just a quick breakdown kind of a contact spray. It'll knock a lot of them down. And you got to think of other clever ways as alternatives, you know, for controlling these kinds of pests. But at least I hope there would be some allowance for that, because there is a place for pesticides in this world that we have. So
Chickens.
And the chickens, okay, chickens
yeah.
and guinea fowl, if you have those.
Elizabeth says no.
There you go.
Food
Get a bunch
safety
of
wise, no.
There you go. Bugs, yes. Chickies,
I never
no.
thought of that.
Frogs.
Because there's
Lots of frogs.
You could do frogs. Yep, lots of frogs. But the chickens can poop in the
Really?
garden, and then you've got the issue with contamination. So
Okay, then.
Well, that's a good remark to know.
Nice.
Okay, Matt, this is actually a thistle question.
All right.
And they're typically in mulch beds, but of course people also end up then with them in the turf. They've used Roundup, they've manually pulled, no matter what, more keep coming up, and they're coming in from adjacent open
Oh yeah.
park turf areas.
They get bad fast, like the Russian
Yeah.
thistle. They'll start with one plant one year, and
Yeah.
you leave it, and then
Yeah.
it seeds out, and then there's a million plants around it. So making sure you control that plant before it seeds out is the biggest thing, because otherwise you're going to have seed for the next 3-4 years, and they're just going to keep coming up. And there really is no good way of doing it. I mean, there are some herbicides that work okay on them, but thistles are a little tougher. So some of those 3 or 4-way products, but when you're doing it in mulch beds, you have to be careful for any of the surrounding plants, so you're not going to kill them. So pulling them is probably the best thing when they're young. Getting them before they get old.
Okay.
Even mowing them, that works. Keeping them from seed now,
Knock
if you
them
can.
back.
Yep.
All right, thanks, Matt. All right, so a weeping cherry, Lauren. It's only been flowering on one side for a number of years, and the other side doesn't have any leaves. Any trunk pathogen, canker sorts of things with cherry that you're familiar with?
Yeah, so with cherry, there's several. You could have, with stone fruits, even brown rot, for example, will cause some cankers in trees. The key is to go ahead and remove those dead parts, and if you can, prune it 3 to 5 inches below the affected area, if that's possible, on the trunk of the tree, because it will continue to spread. And if it's a major part of that weeping cherry and it's really affecting the crown, you may need to replace it because that part's going to continue to expand probably.
All right, thanks, Lauren. Okay, Elizabeth, this is a West Point viewer. He actually sent us a picture of this particular Asiatic dayflower, but we don't need that to know what to do or not to do. He's really been trying pretty much everything. Snapshot, Treflan, doesn't phase it, doesn't want to kill everything with a spray over the top. Any ideas on this one?
For those of you that have never battled the Asiatic dayflower, it's the 2-petaled blue flower. It's really pretty, except for if it's in your bed. Now this thing, I noticed it's in my flower bed. I was gonna get out and I was gonna apply that Snapshot to it to see if I could control it. And it had already emerged and come out at the beginning of May. So I had missed my window. I did some more research on it, and pre-emergence, there's not a lot that are gonna be very effective on it. The post-emergence, like Matt's talked about, with some of that 3-way and 4-way products are going to be your best bet. Roundup or a glyphosate product doesn't touch it. You can rogue it out, you can hoe it, you can get rid of it. The thing to keep in mind is the seeds are viable for like up to 20 years. So you're probably going to be fighting it in that location for a long time. And the thing to keep in mind too is if you decide to hoe it up and mess up that area, you're going to have more that continue to sprout throughout the season. So you're going to have to do it on a regular basis in that location to try to get good control. But unfortunately, there's no good pre-emergent that's going to work on it. And the post-emergence, you have to be very careful to only get it onto the weed itself.
All right. Yes, sir. And on that note, lightning happens. Elizabeth, are you ready?
Let's go.
We have a Lincoln viewer who has for 3 or 4 years had sudden death of 2 to 3 bloomerang lilacs every single year. Should he replant or give it up?
Not bloomerang, don't replant them. Try something different, not reliably hardy.
All right. What about the use of plain old vinegar as a weed control in the landscape?
Most of the time when we talk about using the horticultural vinegar, it's going to have a higher acetic acid content to it. So that's where we're going to try to use that, and you're going to get a better result than using the household vinegar.
All right. We have a butterfly's magnolia, which is the yellow one, that has not bloomed for the last 3 years. Should it be pruned or left alone?
You could try to prune it, but unfortunately, you really can't make it bloom. It's just got to be ready and bloom on its own.
All right. Harry Lauder's walking sticks this year all over are showing a lot of dead limbs. Why?
Winter kill.
Which is exactly probably right. Can an old pear tree that has been cut down be used for mulch in the garden?
Yep, you can use that. You just got to make sure that you chip it up and get it small enough. You could also use it, I believe, in the smoker for those of you that like to cook meat. It's a very nice fruit wood that you can smoke with.
You bet. Absolutely. Nice job. Okay, Lauren, you ready? Like?
Bologna tonight.
Okay, bologna to you too.
Yeah,
all right.
No pass.
So this is a viewer who said she has hostas coming up, excuse me, that have curled leaves and holes in them, but this is not that hosta virus X, right?
It could be slug damage, actually. I've seen that with slugs.
I would agree.
Okay. All right.
Second
no
from the entomologist.
No
2 points
help.
for me. I think I get double points for that because I answered one that.
So the same walking stick question from a different viewer, no leaves and there is white stuff on the leafless branches that looks fungal. Yes? Is that just because of the dead branches?
Pass.
Okay, we have a rose that has emerged with incredible soft red thorns, ton of them. What is that and what to do about it?
It's a virus-infected rose. Rogue it out. Could be rose rosette. Could be another one.
All right, will powdery mildew all over the leaves of choke cherries also affect the fruit? This person wants to eat the choke cherries.
Go ahead and eat it.
Okay. We have a person who has a missing bark patches on a shantung maple. This is in Omaha. Is that a sign of verticillium wilt, or do we know that?
Not that I know of. Could be lightning strike.
Okay. And on that note,
Lightning on the back.
style, I guess.
Sorry, I
okay,
still lost, but that's okay.
are you ready, Matt?
Oh yeah, we gotta get 6, right?
Well, I don't think I have 6 questions for you. I better make something up quick. All right,
Yes.
so grass be gone. Can it be used around trees without harming the trees?
Yes.
All right. We have a viewer who has trees that are growing in the fence up to 4 inches in diameter. They want to be able to cut them down, drill holes, and then dump Tordon on them. Good idea or not?
Just cut them and treat them with Tordon. No need to drill holes, just around it. As long as there's nothing around there that you're gonna kill. If it's just the trees you're getting rid of and there's no trees around, Tordon.
All
Otherwise,
right.
Roundup.
How, this viewer wants to know, how do you mow a turf that has been interseeded without injuring the new blades coming up through it?
Oh, you're gonna have to mow it no matter what. And actually, mowing the new seedlings helps them spread out.
All right. We have a viewer in the central part of the state wondering if they can get away with absolutely never mowing their buffalo grass.
You could, but it would probably get 6 to 12 inches tall, depending on how good the soil is, and then you're probably gonna have to burn it off the next season or let it be.
All right. Nice job. Perfect timing.
Yeah.
Did you run out of questions?
No, I had one left.
Dang.
I might have made it up, but I had one
Yeah.
left. All right, Jim, you ready?
Go for it, yes.
We have a viewer who has asked us if there is a good insect spray around the entire perimeter of a house.
Yeah, there are a number of them that contain the ingredient like cyfluthrin or bifenthrin. You'll usually see them as products that say home defense or has something to do with crawling insects around the house.
All right. We have apples and all other fruits that are already set on. Is there anything to spray now for insects? Or
Yeah,
is
you
it-
need to follow a spray schedule because we still have some plum cuculio opportunity there as well as codling moth now. So go and check information. We have it with the university as well on spray schedules to accommodate insects, insect pests, and diseases.
All right. What is the best outside spray to keep those thrips from biting you?
The thrips. Well, get rid of all dandelions and flowers or whatever, and they won't be around that much either. I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay, the mosquitoes are also out en masse. Is it wipes, clothing, citronella, vanilla, or vinegar?
Well, minus the vinegar, the citronella, the permethrin on clothing, and then the foggers or what you can apply to yourself. Sure. But yeah, they're available, and so yeah, we're getting into that season.
Okay, and I know this for a fact since I do my questions on the back patio and I am scratching as we speak. All right, Elizabeth, we have plants of the week that were chosen actually in honor of Memorial Day. Red, white, and blue.
Red, white, and blue. And
So,
we're going to start off with the red one. Oddly enough, it's called Lady in Red Salvia. This one is an annual salvia. It gets about 18 inches tall. The cool part with the salvias, and Jim can attest to that, is to watch all the pollinators come and feed on those. And so they're ones that are really kind of fun to see and watch the pollinators come in and feed on throughout the season. You can kind of deadhead these and keep them going throughout the summer to make sure that they put on some new flowers. The blue one in the back is our perennial coneflower. It's one that will get about 18 inches tall or so. It likes it a little bit dry. It can kind of seed itself a little bit, but if you kind of take a look at it, you're like, wow, that looks a lot like a giant bachelor button, and you would be right. This is one of the big ones. It's a big cornflower. Sorry if I misspoke, but it's all
say
right.
people are now going to want a blue coneflower.
Blue coneflower, cornflower, it's the same thing. It's fine. The blue one. And so it is just like a giant bachelor button, Centaurea with that one. And then the white one down in front is going to be the double file viburnum. There's a couple of viburnums that are blooming right now. One is the American cranberry bush, and then this one is the double file. The cool part about that is the big showy flowers on here are actually sterile. And the ones that are actually viable are going to be the ones deep down the center that are really tiny and don't look like very much. So the ones that are all in show around the outside are those sterile ones. I mean, you can get some that are going to be that 10 by 10, 10 foot wide, 10 foot tall. There's some dwarf ones. This year we're noticing a lot of issues with that hardiness on some of those. And so you're having to prune out some of the dead and kind of see how it comes out of it. But some very lovely red, white, and blue flowers in honor of this weekend.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth. All right, Jim, picture number 3. So this is a viewer who lives south of Blair and found these when they were actually deadheading the daffodils, and that's great for her to put in a dime in there for a little bit of scale.
Yeah, and the eggs look really nice and crisp too.
Yeah.
You know.
She wonders what they're going to be.
Well, I did a little research on this one because, and I knew right away that it had to be a true bug because of just the way the eggs are, and they have a little weak spot on the end called an operculum that pops open, you know, when the little nymph hatches out. And so I got it down to a broad-headed bug, I think. And broad-headed bugs are kind of related to squash bugs, but they're not nearly as devastating. They feed on a number of different plants and weeds, and you don't see very many of them in the landscape. So that happened to be a female who happened to be around on that plant and deposited those eggs, but it could have just as well been anywhere else.
Okay, good.
Broad-headed bug.
A broad-headed bug.
So by that statement, it is correct that all entomologists do not study bugs.
Oh, of course they do. And
They all study
spiders.
bugs. Okay.
Yeah,
But it's
and
a bug.
mites.
Okay. Right.
It's a bug.
When you said it was a true bug.
We always have to say true bug, yeah, because there's so many other insects. And it's
Okay.
it's a local colloquial kind of a term that we all grow up with, bug.
It's a bug, right.
Yeah.
You're bugging
Crawls,
me.
it's a bug.
You're not
Yeah,
insecting
if it
me.
crawls, it's a bug.
All right, yours is a compaction issue. This is a Gretna viewer. At least they think it is. He's put down field conditioner, gypsum, overseeded with a rye fescue mix, put down starter fertilizer. They have a sprinkler system. 3 weeks and they still haven't seen anything come up through this. They want to know, should they aerate, top dress, wait till fall? The area, yeah, what's going on here?
That one's tough. It's almost like, I don't know if that's, dog spots, winter kill too, it could be. It almost looks like it's kind of a low-lying area that's wet, compacted like they said. So aerifying would definitely help, and going over it multiple times, and getting the seed actually into the soil. So you might have a little bit of thatch there. If you seed it and it's on top, it's probably not going to germinate as well as getting that either with a power rake or an aerifier and breaking that layer up. That'd be one thing. Sounds like you did everything else right. Starter, putting some amendments in there. I'd say look for a good seed source just to make sure that you are not planting bad seed. If you have old stuff that you're putting out, make sure you get some new stuff and go from there. But
All right.
should be possible.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, Lauren, this is a viewer who thinks she has Cytospora canker of spruce. There's the spruce itself, and then she's seeing all the white rosin on the trunk and on the branches. She's thinking it doesn't look like they're going to be able to save this particular tree, wondering what she should do.
So and it could be Cytospora canker based on distribution and all the pitch on the branches that they're showing. With that, pruning out all of those injured branches is going to be the first action. If it becomes more extensive and it's affecting the overall aesthetic value of the tree, then you're probably going to look at removal. It's a very difficult disease to actually control in the landscape. The one thing you can do, just make sure it's not being stressed in any way, because drought stress can really favor a lot of our fungal cankers that we see.
All right, thanks, Lauren. Okay, Elizabeth, this is a Hastings viewer who really wants to have some yews rather drastically pruned. They've kind of overgrown some locations. Can he do some pretty drastic pruning on these, and could he go ahead and do some of that now?
Since the yews have already shown and they've already put on their new growth, you can go ahead and prune those back. Now, when we say drastic, normally we say don't take it back more than a third of the shrub. And so with the yews and the other evergreens like that, we don't want to cut back into the area where there's no needles, because it's not going to resprout new needles. So on some of those, you could take them back by a good foot and see where you're at. and check and see if you're removing too much foliage, or maybe you're getting into the heart of the shrub where there's not as many needles on there. But you can do a little bit of pruning right now, and it's actually a good time. You just want to make sure that you do proper pruning cuts with clean tools, and then we also want to make sure that we just don't leave a nub at the end, kind of like Lauren's juniper sample. We want to make sure we make an angled cut away from the bud and make sure we follow those rules too.
All right, thanks, Elizabeth. Well, if you've got something rotten or chewed up or the infamous brown spots or anything else in your garden, we do encourage you to send us a sample. But you're going to have to take a few notes on our second feature tonight, so your sample will arrive as something our diagnostician can use and not a lump of smelly mush. Here's Kyle Broderick to give us some tips on sending in a sample.
So whenever you're sending in a sample to figure out what's going on in your garden, whether it's a pest or a plant disease problem, the quality of the sample as well as the background information provided really makes a big difference in getting an accurate and timely diagnosis. So one of the main things that we really like is if people can send in the entire plant. Really gives us an idea of what's going on. So I just dug up this poor looking coleus that we had, and one great thing to do is to dig up the entire root ball if possible and just put that root ball into a plastic bag. That way we'll contain a lot of the soil from getting onto the rest of the plant. Once we have the root ball contained, I prefer you that then put it into a second larger bag and we can close it up. One of the worst things to do when sending in a sample though is to allow extra moisture inside of the bag. If there is extra moisture in the bag, every other sort of fungal and bacterial pathogen will just start growing, and it can really obscure what we're looking at. So if you do notice some excess moisture, recommend that you just put in a piece of dry newspaper into the sample bag, and that way it'll help soak up most of the moisture. We get a lot of samples that come in with no label whatsoever. So just put some sort of label on the Ziploc bag. That way we know how it's identified. And finally, we ask that you put it into a sturdy container, preferably with some sort of packing material. Shredded newspaper works just fine for this. And we also have our Plant and Pest Diagnostic Clinic sample submission form. This form has most of the information that we would ask if we were trying to figure out what exactly is going on in your garden. While some of these questions you couldn't answer, we just ask that you fill it out as completely as possible, and once filled out, go ahead and just stick it into that same box with the rest of the sample, close up the box, and go ahead and mail it to the Plant and Pest Diagnostic Clinic here on East Campus, and we'll take a look at it. One of the worst things that can happen when submitting a sample is to submit and to send out dry leaves, dry or dead leaves. That's one of the reasons we ask that people use Ziploc bags or plastic bags, as in when people use paper bags, things tend to dry out quite a bit. And if we get some samples that are looking like this, it is next to impossible to figure out what the main issue was. If you're going to be sending in any insect issues, we also ask that you put them into secondary containers as well. If we're having some soft-bodied insects, recommend that you get a vial like this, put a little bit of rubbing alcohol in there, and then you can drop the specimen inside of that. If it's a hard-bodied insect, you could just put it into a small Tupperware container or something like that. So in conclusion, if you are going to mail these samples in, try to mail them Monday through Wednesday. If you drop them in the mail Thursday or Friday, good chance it'll be stuck in the mail truck over the weekend and it'll be a dried out mess by the time we get it on Monday.
And a good sample will help both us and the diagnostic clinic really give you the best diagnosis and then the solution to whatever that garden problem is. And again, do not use USPS because our university mail delivery is every other day. It'll sit over the weekend and we have like a bag of stuff that is indecipherable. All right, picture 4. This is a viewer in Omaha who has bur oaks that he thinks have bullet galls.
Right, yeah.
What to do?
Well, even in that case, it looks like it's so severe that it is affecting the foliage, foliation or whatever above that area. So this especially happens in younger trees. But you have to be very careful in how you go about pruning it. As an entomologist, I don't know much about that. I'd just say whack it. But the horticulturalists and arborists would say there's a certain way of doing it. So, but yeah, you're going to have to prune some of that out and then prune it in such a way that you can still get some regrowth that's pretty balanced. And then as a tree gets older, it will have less issues with that. There's really not much that can be done about spraying or treating for it. There's no information, no one's done any research. It's very complicated life history on this particular gall wasp.
All right, thanks, Jim. This is a Kearney viewer, and they think they have bindweed. Network of roots pops up the next day after it's removed. How do you treat bindweed?
Bindweed, you treat it like it's a weed and you get rid of it, because it just takes over. It'll cover that whole bed in about another 2-3 weeks. So one of the really great herbicides that works on it is actually quinclorac. So if there's nothing else in the garden that you're trying to get rid of or that you don't want to get rid of, that would be a good product. And remember to look at the label. Surfactants with those do help. And that one works really well. And there's other products with quin in it if you're trying to control other weeds. Because yeah, simply pulling it is another option. You just want to make sure you do that before it seeds out, because then that's what happened last year, I'm sure. You got lots of seeds to come up throughout the year.
Right. Pull, pull, pull.
Yeah,
pull.
It's just never ending pull.
Pull, pull. Yeah. All right, Lauren, this is again a hosta question. This viewer sent us a picture of hostas emerging with what she says is deformed growth. And I know last week Kyle had hostavirus X on the show, so she's wondering, is this a virus and should it be treated? Any way to tell?
Yeah, so the biggest thing with viruses that we look for, because they also, slug injury on these, like we had the question during the lightning round, can form those deformed leaves. If you've got real true mosaics, and as these leaves continue to expand, if they're deformed and you've got a mottling in the leaf and blotchiness, then it's most likely a virus, if that's not the type of growth habit that hosta has, because some hostas look like they're virus infected almost. So just look at that, especially, and then the other thing is if it's one in a group and that one's stunted or disformed in any way that way, then I would rogue that out so it doesn't spread to your other plants.
All right.
No other real treatment.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. All righty, we have 2 different Japanese maple pictures for you. And the first one here is actually one that is a Tobiosho, Japanese maple, west side of the house, 6 years ago. Looks like it doesn't have much for green leaves. The other one is actually a Shenandoah, Iowa viewer. And again, this is one this was planted late fall, sprayed with an anti-desiccant, surrounded with all sorts of things over the winter months, but she's drawn a circle, which is really nice, around the top there where she's saying, not much left. So replace, prune out. What are we saying about Japanese maples, Elizabeth?
When it comes to Japanese maples, there's the hardy varieties that do really well for us. And unfortunately, the first green one isn't one of those that happens to be really reliably hardy for us. Also, you need to have the right environment for the Japanese maples. So with that green one, even the viewer said, I know it's in the wrong spot. It's surrounded by rock mulch. It's on the west side. And so those can also play a big factor in whether or not that Japanese maple is happy. And so at this point in time, prune out anything that is not leafed out. So on that green one, there's still going to be some left. It's going to be more of it's going to look a little funny for a while unless you try to prune some of those branches and train some of those branches up. Unfortunately, with that little red one, more than likely your leader is gone. So you either need to train a new leader, or you need to just let it be like a little shrub for a little bit.
All right. So on that note, We have a couple of things we want to talk about right quick. One is the Monument Valley Irish Show is coming up, which is June 2nd and 3rd in Scotts Bluff. And of course, we're going to be in Kearney on June 3rd. And